right, so welcome everyone. We're so happy to be with you again today. This is Heschel's The Prophets with Dr. Bondi. Just a couple of words about Dror. Dror Bondi is dedicated to bringing Abraham Joshua Heschel's thought to Israel, translating his words into Hebrew, and transforming Israel by his spirit. His PhD is from Bar Ilan University, and his translations and his own writings are highly acclaimed. We're so lucky to have Dror with us today. And Dror, I'll turn this to you.
Thank you, Avi. Hello, everyone. We continue today with Heschel's interpretation of Jeremiah. We read last week his radical understanding of the way Jeremiah experienced his prophecies. And I promised you in our last class that today it will be more radical. So please prepare yourself. We are going to read Heschel's radical interpretation of Jeremiah's understanding of his experience of prophecy as a rape. The verse, yes, the words which which Heschel are going to suggest us his interpretation are the Hebrew words Pititani Hashem va'epat, Chazaktani v'tuchal. Okay, so Judith, you want to be our first reader?
O Lord, thou hast deceived me, and I was deceived. Thou art stronger than I, and thou hast prevailed. This standard rendition misses completely the meaning of the text and ascribes to Jeremiah a pitiful platitude, quote, thou art stronger than I. The proper rendition of Jeremiah's exclamation would be, O Lord, thou hast seduced me, and I am seduced. Thou hast raped me, and I am overcome.
Let's stop for a moment for breathing, and let's look for a moment on the literal interpretation itself. Yes, Heschel is going to explain it, but I want to stress his contributions. Yes. What is the difference? What is the difference between deceived me and seduced me? Seduced me is indeed much more literal interpretation of the Hebrew word pititani. Indeed, pitui is the Hebrew word for seduce. Of course, you can make pitui in much, yes, unliteral interpretation is much more as an allegory. Yes, deceived me, but this is indeed Heschel's interpretation is more literal. But the other the last two lines of the verse is Chazaktani v'tuchal. The regular translation much is look like much more reasonable. Yes, thou art stronger than I. Yes, Chazaktani, you are more chazak, you are more strong, you are stronger than me. And the last word, vatuchal, is a saying about God. Yes, you can make it. Yes, thou hast prevailed. You was indeed stronger. This is the literal understanding of the how do you say it in Hebrew? This is the pshat. Yes, this is the more simple reading of the Hebrew words. So what is the source of Heschel's translation thou hast raped me, for chazaktani, and I am overcome, for vatuchal. Yes, Heschel read the last word vatuchal as if it was written vauchal. Yes, vauchal. I can make it, but this is not the word. I checked it in the Greek translation, the ancient Greek translation of the Bible, and indeed maybe Heschel used it. My Greek is not so good to understand it until all the depths of the Greek translation, but I don't know if you know that there are a lot of differences between the Greek translation of Jeremiah and our Hebrew Bible, and the scholars said that maybe he had the Greek translation another original of Jeremiah. There are too many differences between the translation, the Greek translation, and our Hebrew Bible. So maybe Heschel found or suggested, but no one English translation which were before Heschel suggested such a translation. So this is very unique translation of Heschel, and now he is going to explain why he suggested this translation of raped, but he didn't explain why vatuchal is and I am overcome. He only explained, he questioned the meaning. Yes, as he said, pitiful platitude. Thou art stronger than I. Yes, what is the meaning of such a saying about God? Of course, God is stronger than Jeremiah, but maybe we can see here a correction which Heschel did to the Hebrew Bible. Yes, as if Heschel said, I can't believe that Jeremiah wrote vatuchal. There were mistake here. Yes, there was a mistake here, and there are several corrections of Heschel in his book of the Hebrew Bible, but here it is very very unique, and of course the meaning of this translation. So let's read his explanation. Please continue, Judith, if you can. The meaning.
The meaning of this extraordinary confession becomes clear when we consider what commentators have failed to notice, namely the specific meaning of the individual words. The striking feature of the verse is the use of two verbs, patach and chazak.
Patah.
The first, I'm sorry, patah, I'm sorry, and chazak. The first term is used in the Bible and in the special sense of wrongfully inducing a woman to consent to prenuptial intercourse. The second term denotes the violent forcing of a woman to submit to extranuptial intercourse, which is thus performed against her will. So he's saying chazak is used in that.
Yes, he brought here references, but I skipped.
The first denotes seduction or enticement, the second, rape. The words used by Jeremiah to describe the impact of God upon his life are identical with the terms for seduction and rape in the legal terminology of the Bible.
Okay, as I said, I skipped his sources to show why this is legal terminology of rape and seduction. But the main question, of course, is what is the meaning? Yes, what is Jeremiah's experience of prophet as a prophet when he used such terminology of seduction and rape. So, besides the question of the terms and the if this translation is good or not good, the question is what is its meaning, and let's read. This is, I believe, a very unique explanation of Heschel of the experience of prophecy. Yes, this is the main task of his work. Explain us, to invite us to understand what is the experience of prophecy and the prophets, and who wants to be our next reader.
These terms, used in immediate juxtaposition, forcefully convey the complexity of the divine human relationship, sweetness of enticement, as well as violence of rape. Jeremiah, who, like Hosea, thought of the relationship between God and Israel in the image of love, interpreted his own involvement in the same image. This interpretation betrays an ambivalence in the prophet's understanding of his own experience. The call to be a prophet is more than an invitation. It is first of all a feeling of being enticed, of acquiescence or willing surrender. But this winsome feeling is only one aspect of the experience. The other aspect is a sense of being ravished or carried away by violence, of yielding to overpowering force against one's own will. The prophet feels both the attraction and the coercion of God, the appeal and the pressure, the charm and the stress. He is conscious of both voluntary identification and forced capitulation. The dialectic of what takes place in the prophetic consciousness points to the approach we have adopted in our analysis. Objectively considered, it is on the one hand the divine pathos which stirs and entices the prophet, and on the other hand, unconditioned power which exercises sheer compulsion over the prophet. Subjectively, it is in consequence the willing response of sympathy to persuasion, and also the sense of being utterly delivered up to the overwhelming power of God. A man whose message is doom for the people he loves not only forfeits his own capacity for joy, but also provokes the hostility and outrage of his contemporaries. The sights of woe, the anticipation of disaster nearly crush his soul.
Thank you so much. This is very sensitive, maybe even poetry, about the experience of Jeremiah. Yes, Heschel let himself get into the soul of Jeremiah and try to understand him from within, not as a psychologist, but if I was Jeremiah, why I would describe my experience in such words. Why? Because the religious experience of the prophet is much deeper than the classic Hebrew words, ir'a ve'ava. Yes, this is not only love and awe. This is much more specific. Yes, the prophet indeed felt the love of God and was deeply impressed and wanted to be in deep connection with God, and suddenly he felt God's anger on his people, God's powerful forcing of the prophet to be his messenger. Yes, in our last classes, we spoke about Hosea and how terrible was his life as a prophet in order to understand God's feeling. And here Jeremiah spoke about it. Yes, it was awful to be in front of God's feelings. Yes, God's cried in the prophet's ears and sent him to make a change in history. And the prophet didn't want to do it. The prophet loved his people. The prophet felt that he can't bring such a message from God to his people, but God didn't let him go. God forced him. God started with love, and when the prophet felt such deeply friendship and fellowship with God, he suddenly understood that was only the first step in the relationship. And the second step was deeply awful for the prophet, who didn't want to be a messenger of such message, of such doom. So Heschel spoke about it objectively and subjectively. Objectively means, Judy, thank you. In a moment. Objectively means here the prophet's feeling about what happened to God outside there in God's life, and subjectively means what happened in the heart of the prophet, as he, the prophet, understood it. So Heschel described this complicated situation from several sides and with a lot of nuance. Yes, Judith, do you want to ask something?
Reading the lines carefully, it seemed to me that the prophet is being described as being overpowered by more than just God. On the one sense, he's overpowered by God's pure force. But that line that surprised me was that he provoked outrage of his contemporaries. So he's also feeling that negative reaction towards himself. And then what I felt to be slightly different and a third negative reaction was that in contemplating the disaster that's going to befall the people, that also, quote, crushes his soul. So there are three forces coming at him as I'm reading Heschel. It's God's pure strength. It's the reaction of his contemporaries whom he loves, but they're being negative to him. And the third is the awareness of the disaster. And they're slightly different, I think.
Yes, maybe Heschel tried to explain why God needed to be such overwhelming power. Why? Because the prophet didn't want to fight with his people. He didn't want to see such a disaster in his mind. And because these two reactions, God had to force him, because no one wants to go to his people with such messages, and no one wants to see by himself, to understand by himself such prophecies. So because these two negative reactions, God had to act and to force the prophet to send him. This is how I understood it.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Thank you for your question. Anyone else? Any comment? Any question? Can you accept such interpretation? It is not an easy one to accept, but it is meaningful and very unique and deep. I believe that the power of Heschel is not only because he understood biblical terms, the language of the Bible, but because he dared to get into the soul of the prophet, and this why with this depth, he can read, he can let himself read and understand such interpretations. So let's continue. And in the end of the chapter, Heschel suggested us other comments about Jeremiah. I couldn't bring all of them. This is the longest chapter in the book, but I chose several of them. There were scholars who tried to explain Jeremiah's self-understanding, a saying of self-understanding, as a witness for losing his mind. And Heschel can't accept it, and he tried to explain the sources in which Jeremiah looked like insane, in insanity. He tried to explain these sources in another way. So I brought several of them. As you remember, in our last class, Jeremiah is the prophet of the anger, yes? And Heschel already wrote about it we spoke about it in our previous class, but here another perspective of Jeremiah, of the anger of Jeremiah. Who wants to be our next reader? Anyone? Or shall be back for Judith? You want? Irene, you want? Thank you.
I can read, but I'm not a native speaker, and it may be sometimes there is a word I don't know. Excuse me. I am full of wrath, Hema of God, exclaims Jeremiah. He was filled with a blazing passion, and it was this emotional intensity which drove him to discharge God's wrathful errands. The ultimate purpose of a prophet is not to be inspired, but to inspire the people, not to be filled with a passion, but to impassion the people with understanding for God. Yet the ears of this people were closed, the ears. The word of the Lord is to them an object of scorn. Jeremiah was filled to overflowing with the wrath of God, which he could neither suppress nor contain, and which poured itself out therefore upon innocent children in the street and upon the gatherings of young men. The wrath of God was not the threat of judgment being poured forth, but the upsurge of wrath in Jeremiah himself. The compulsion to pour it forth must not be regarded as an ecstatic compulsion, but for up to this point, Jeremiah had been able to contain his anger. From this confession on the part of the prophet, it is clear with what agitation and passionate concern he was accustomed to fulfill his vocation. Again and again, Jeremiah proclaimed the pathos of wrath. His being filled with divine wrath was his sympathy with it. Jeremiah not only experienced such sympathy, he was fully conscious of his experience. The question may be asked whether to the mind of Jeremiah his sympathy proceeded from an internal impulse or whether it was forced upon him from without. The phrase, "Thou hadst filled me with indignation," might justify the supposition that he experienced his agitation not as a personal response, but as an inoculated emotion, a state of being possessed. However, as we shall see, such a supposition is improbable. According to Jeremiah 25, the prophet was told by the Lord, "Take from my hand this cup of wine of wrath. Hema, and make all the nations to whom I send you drink it. Then you shall say to them, thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, drink, be drunk and vomit, fall and rise no more, because of the world I am sending among you. To drink of the divine wrath meant the same as to be doomed or drink poison. It would therefore be absurd to assume that Jeremiah drank or was filled with divine anger. It was the pathos that evoked in him an anger of sympathy.
Thank you, thank you.
I have a question.
Yes,
I'm
please.
still learning Hebrew, and from where do I know that the verb which he translated with overcome comes from yachal or achal? Do you know what
Yes.
I mean?
Yes, yes. We going back. Yes. The source of the word vatuchal is yachal. Means he can make it. Yes.
I know the meaning of yachal.
Yes. But when Heschel translated it, and I am overcome, he read it as if it was written va'uchal, I can, from the same source of yachal. Yes, not to eat achal. Yes, but I could make it va'uchal. I could make it from the shoresh yachal. If I understood him, but this is what you wanted to ask. I understood your question.
No, I'm thinking about the interpretation with achal, and if there is hunger and no need to eat evermore, that's not the meaning.
No, I don't think.
Okay, and it's okay.
And a question on the same word still.
Yes.
If he reads it as ve'uchal, how does that become I am raped? In other words,
no, I am raped is from the word chazaktani, because
I see.
You forced me with
You rape, and I am overcome, but overcome is still. My Hebrew grammar is not great, so I would expect it to be a passive of he feel of some sort rather than the uchal means I will be able. No, am I hearing that wrong?
No, va'uchal in the language of the Bible, this form of va make it past. It's not like the modern Hebrew, which make it future. And like vayomer Elohim ye'or means God said in past perfect. Yes, this form of va in the language of the Bible, it's past perfect. And I am overcome. I am overkal va'uchal. Yes, maybe I read it as present. I don't know why, but I think it should be in the past. Any other question? So let's go back to what we read just now. Yes, Heschel here ask us how we read these verses. I am full of wrath. Yes, what is the meaning of full? Yes, or yes, why Jeremiah poured why the wrath of God poured itself out upon innocent children, etc. Yes, what is all this of all these metaphors of anger and or thou hadst filled me with indignation. What is the meaning of filled again? What are all these metaphors of anger? And Heschel knew that other scholars suggested that it was, what was his term, ecstatic anger. Yes, as if Jeremiah lost his mind and the anger poured itself out of him without control. But Heschel can't accept it. He explained from this source that this image of cup, yes, cup of Ras, yes, when Ras filled the cup, Jeremiah himself used it as a metaphor for poison, which God sent him to the other nations to let them drink this cup of anger. So we can't accept that Jeremiah spoke about himself as someone who also drank from this cup of anger. So Heschel's explanation is that this is the meaning of the pathos and the sympathy. Why Jeremiah spoke about himself as someone who is filled with anger, because he identified himself with God's anger. It was his conscience. He didn't lost his mind. But you know, when someone who you in love is anger, you also become anger. This is a sympathetic or empathic reaction to between very close friends or lovers. Yes, and in this way Heschel explained what is the meaning of this verses, not as ecstatic losing of mind, insanity or something like this, but as a deep sympathy between the prophet and God's pathos. God is so angry, so the prophet choose to react with anger from by himself. Yes, the prophet brought his own anger in order to react with sympathy to God's anger. This is all these metaphors of full of anger. Yes, it was his own anger, which was the tool to or the yes to hold God's anger, to react to God's anger. Yes, when your close friend tells you in harsh words about his experience, you have to use your own experience in order to let him feel that you understand him. Yes, that you sympathetic to his own experience. This is how we understand each other. We tried to listen. We tried to be in full attentiveness to the others' feelings, experiences, etc. But we have no but our own experience in order to react to our friends' experience. So in such a way, Heschel explained the prophetic experience between God and the prophet. What do you say? Any question, any comment? I think this is also, yes, we can see another example of Heschel's uniqueness, unique understanding of the prophet. While other scholars look from outside on the prophet as someone who, primitive, as if the scholar knows better than the prophet what happened to the prophet. Yes, as if the scholar was a psychologue. Heschel tried to react with sympathy to the prophet. Just like the prophet react with sympathy to God, Heschel tried to read him by sympathy, by his own experience and understanding, to react to the prophets, self-understanding and experience. Shall we continue? So let's read another. This is a long text. Okay, we will try to read it. Who want to be Judith again? Yes.
Modes of prophetic sympathy are determined by the modes of the divine pathos. The pathos of love and the pathos of anger awake corresponding tones in the heart of the prophet. In his confessions, Jeremiah allows us to obtain a glimpse of the fervor of love as well as of the raging of anger against the people. Through insight into the nexus between prophetic emotion and divine pathos, it is possible to gain a clue to the meaning behind the conflicting and confusing emotions of Jeremiah's mind. His inconsolable grief over the destiny of the people is an expression of fellowship and love. The people's anguish is his anguish. However, his emotions are not simply an expression of instinctive attachment to his people or a feeling of personal involvement in their fate. At times, Jeremiah even wishes to abandon his people. Excuse me. Ardent as was his love for the people, he was primarily driven by what God felt for Israel. According with divine pathos determined his attractions and aversions. Love involves an appreciation of what is precious in the beloved person. Israel was precious because it was the consort and the beloved of the Lord.
Thank you. Let's stop for a moment. Yes. Here, Heschel tried to explain the complicated reactions of Jeremiah. Why suddenly he full of anger and suddenly full of love? Why suddenly sympathetic to God's feelings and suddenly sympathetic to the feelings of the people? Why? Not because he is unrational and uncoherent human being, but because this is the complicated relationship between God and the people. God himself, we saw it in our previous class, hesitated between his love and his anger. Yes, and because the complicated relationship between God to the people, the prophet became a complicated person. Yes, there are times he felt love for his people, and there are times he wished to abandon his people because this is what happened to God himself. So the prophet ran between God's feelings. Okay, let's continue. Deeply hurt.
And someone else read. I'm having.
Yes. Ziva, do you want to continue?
Yeah, that's fine. Okay.
Thank you.
Deeply hurt by the accusations, Jeremiah protested before God his innocence and his love of his people. The word of doom was not born in his heart, chapter 17:6. Remember how I stood before thee to turn away thy wrath from them. Jeremiah 18:20. Indeed, this was a part of the complexity of the prophet's inner existence. He was a person overwhelmed by the sympathy for God and sympathy for man. Standing before the people, he pleaded for God. Standing before God, he pleaded for his people. The prediction of doom was contrary to his own feelings. When the false prophet Hananiah predicted that within 2 years' time, the captives of Judah, together with the vessels of the temple, which had been taken to Babylonia after the first Babylonian invasion, would be brought back to Jerusalem, Jeremiah exclaimed, Amen. May the Lord do so. May the Lord make the words which you have prophesied come true. 28:6. The role of the prophet was ambiguous in the eyes of some of his contemporaries. The indignation that flowed from him, the anger he displayed, even when extrinsic to his mind, became so intimate a part of his soul that those exposed to it could easily mistake it as his own antipathy rather than as sympathy with divine anger, and could assume that he had his own axe to grind, that he was giving vent to personal hostility. It seems that Jeremiah was accused of feeling delight in anticipating the disaster which he had announced in the name of the Lord. He who loved his people, whose life was dedicated to saving his people, was regarded as an enemy. Over and above the agony of sensing the imminent disaster, his soul was bruised by calumny. What protection was there against such backbiting? No one could look into his heart, but everybody was hurt by his words. Only the Lord knew the truth. Aside from the moral problem involved in the harsh petitions, there is a personal problem. Do not such contrasts or opposing attitudes indicate a lack of integrity? Is not his pleading for the destruction of his opponents a collapse of his power of mercy? A way of comprehending these contradictions as being parts of a unified personality is to remember that the prophet's inner life was not wholly his own. His emotional situation reflected the divine relation to Israel, compassion as well as anger. What he felt was not always original with him, quote, filled with the wrath of God. It was beyond his ability to weigh, measure, or control the outburst of anger. The actual occasion of such an outburst may at times have been a personal one. Its possibility and intensity derived from sympathy. The tension of being caught, heart and soul, into opposing currents of violent emotion was more than a human being could bear. Cursed be the day on which I was born. Oh, that I had in the desert a wayfarer's lodging place, that I might leave my people and go away from them.
Thank you.
So, I think this has occurred to me a couple of times. This sort of reluctance to be a prophet, isn't that kind of standard? I mean, that occurs with other prophets as well. So I'm just wondering why we're emphasizing it so much with Jeremiah.
Yes, I don't want to be a prophet. and it seems that the prophets also didn't want to be. Yes, mystics around the world want to be mystics.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe this is the main difference between mysticism and prophecy. Yes.
Okay.
Mystic want to be mystics, while prophets didn't want to be prophet. Yes, because this is a relationship. This is not only an experience. like the mystic experience. This is a relationship between God and human being, and God is not an easy fellow. Yes, God has a lot of demands. Beside his love, he can't suffer unmoral behavior. And the prophet, the meaning of being a prophet is something like matchmaker, who run between him and her or other genders, and try to make peace between such different persons. Yes, this match between God and the Jewish people is not an. There is no. Say, there is no. This is not an easy couple. Yes, and but this is the the fellowship in which the prophet choose by God to live. Yes, God took him and forced him to be his matchmaker between God and the Jewish people. Yes, a lot of raise handing. Judy, do you want to say something? Yes.
I want to concur with Ziva's observation. I was having the same thought. At each of the prophets we've read show this kind of reluctance and this kind of position of being, the person between God and the people. But sort of reading between the lines, the image I'm getting is Jeremiah seemed to come across as personally angry and destructive in a much stronger way than the others did. We don't hear Heschel referring to that. And I think for that reason, Heschel has to, because he won't accept it as being a deranged mind or a personal issue, I think Heschel spends more time trying to explain how it is part of his role and not the person himself. But I'm getting a sense that even if that's the case, he was being experienced by the people as more angry, more negative, more full of wrath than the others we have read. That's my impression.
Yes, and may I say two things? One, Jeremiah lived in a time of anger. He predicted the destruction of Jerusalem. Yes, it was much easier to be Isaiah, who predicted that Jerusalem will win Assyria. Yeah, so of course this is time of anger. So Jeremiah has no he can't do anything but identified himself with, as we read in our previous class, a prophet is someone who know what is the time. Yes, and this is time of anger. This is one comment. And the second one, indeed, Jeremiah is the most autobiographical prophet. We spoke a lot about his own feelings, his own experience. While Amos, for example, he didn't speak about himself, Amos, but only about God's pathos of justice, etc. Yes, may I say, Jeremiah is development of Hosea. Yes, while Isaiah is development of Amos in this sense. Yes, Amos and Hosea, Amos and Ishayahu spoke much more about God than about themselves, or in Heschel's terms, much more about the pathos than about the sympathy. while Hosea and Jeremiah spoke much more about their own experience, sympathy. And that's why Heschel liked them more, if I can say. Yes, you can see in Heschel's writing that I felt that he identified himself much more with Hosea and Jeremiah, maybe because Heschel tried to speak by them about his own feelings as a lonely prophet, modern prophet, and who felt the anger of God, of course, the Holocaust, Vietnam, the murder of Martin Luther King, etc., and his own experiences of Heschel. So and this was the task of the book, to make for us introduction, make us meet the prophet. So how can we meet them? Only by the autobiographical explanation. So this is, I think, the most powerful chapters in this book about Hosea and about Jeremiah. But in our next class, I will read with you not a chapter about a prophet, about the feelings of a prophet, by a chapter of conclusion of Heschel about the values of the prophet, namely the values of justice. Yes, and this will be another kind of Heschel's writing, in which we can see how this meeting with the personalities of the prophet made Heschel an activist for social justice in the 60s in the US. So this will be a kind of conclusion for our course. Right, David? This is our last, am I right?
I think we actually have one more next week, right?
Next week.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. I'm speaking about our next week.
Oh yeah. Next week is the last one. Yes.
Oh, okay. So yes. So
sorry, I misunderstood you.
Yeah. So in our last class, we will read another kind of chapter as such a conclusion of the values of the prophet.
Can you tell us which chapter to read in advance?
Yes, this is the chapter about the justice. I will find it in a moment. What is the number of this chapter? Chapter 11, Justice. This is the name of the chapter. There are several editions of this book, so there is no meaning for the page number, but chapter 11 about justice.
Okay. Well, I'm looking forward to seeing you for our last class of this course next week. Thank you so much, Dr. Bondi. And thank you to everyone who participated and engaged with us today. We really value you as part of our learning community. And again, thank you so much, everyone. And I'm looking forward to seeing you next week for our last class. Lehitraot. Bye, Dor.